Evan had spent 6 years convincing himself that the past was behind him, until he saw the locket. A small silver heart, glinting under the fading sunlight, hanging around the neck of a little girl with golden hair and familiar blue eyes. His world tilted as realization crashed over him. He knew that locket. Because years ago, he had given one exactly like it to Selena. Evan Sterling had spent the last 6 years convincing himself that the life he had built was enough. His company was thriving, his wealth continued to grow, and he had everything a man could want, except the one thing he had never let himself admit he needed. He had buried himself in work, in success, in control. It was easier that way. It kept him from thinking about the past, about what he had lost, about the woman who had disappeared from his life without a word. That evening, after another long day at the office, he decided to take a walk through the park near his penthouse. He rarely did things like this, but something about the stillness of the early evening, the sound of distant laughter, and the rustling leaves made him slow his pace. He wasn't sure why, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe. That was when he saw them. 2 little girls were playing near the fountain, their blonde hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. They looked identical, moving in perfect sync as they laughed and twirled in their dresses. Evan wasn't one to notice children, but something about them made him pause. There was something familiar in the way they carried themselves, in the way their bright blue eyes sparkled when they smiled. Then one of them turned toward him, and he saw it. A silver heart-shaped locket hung around her neck, glinting in the fading sunlight. His entire body froze. He knew that locket. Years ago, he had given an identical one to Selena. It had been a simple gift, a small token of his affection, but she had treasured it. She had worn it every day. His heart pounded in his chest as he took an unconscious step forward. The girls hadn't noticed him, too caught up in their game, but then a woman's voice called out to them from a nearby bench. "Lily, Sophie, it's time to go." Evan turned toward the voice, and his breath caught in his throat. Sitting on the bench, watching the girls with careful eyes, was Selena. She looked different, her once long hair now shorter, her face a little more tired, but there was no mistaking her. It was her. She was here. Alive. And with her were 2 little girls who looked exactly like him. The world around him blurred. 6 years. 6 years of silence, of believing she was gone, of trying to move on. And now, here she was, sitting only a few feet away with 2 daughters who had his eyes, his golden hair. His mind raced with questions, with disbelief, with anger. She had never told him. She had never given him the chance to know. Selena must have sensed his gaze because she looked up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything else disappeared. Shock flickered across her face, followed by something else, fear, hesitation, guilt. She knew. She knew that he had seen. She knew that there was no running from this. Evan took another step forward, his hands clenched at his sides, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. "Selena," he said, his voice low, controlled, but filled with the storm raging inside him. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Evan." His name on her lips after all these years sent a surge of emotions through him, pain, anger, longing. The girls turned toward their mother, confused by the sudden tension in the air. And just like that, his entire world changed. He had spent 6 years believing he was alone. But he wasn't. Not anymore. Selena looked like she wanted to run. Evan could see it in the way her fingers twitched slightly, in the way her breath hitched just enough for him to notice. But she didn't move. She just sat there, gripping the edge of the bench as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Evan took another step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. The emotions surging through him were impossible to contain, anger, disbelief, confusion. But underneath it all was something deeper, something more painful. Betrayal. For 6 years, he had lived his life believing that Selina was gone, that whatever they had once shared was over. He had searched for her at first, desperate for an explanation, but after a while, he had forced himself to stop. He had convinced himself that she had left because she wanted to, that she had chosen to disappear from his world. And now he stood here, staring at two little girls who looked just like him, and he realized the truth. She hadn't just left. She had taken something from him. Mom. One of the girls, Lily, if he had heard correctly, looked up at Selina with innocent confusion. Who's that? Selina swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Evan and her daughters. Her voice trembled slightly, and then she let out a slow breath. He's an old friend. The words sliced through him. An old friend? That was what he was to her now. Evan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to do this here. Not in front of the girls. But Selina must have sensed his thoughts because she stood abruptly, glancing toward the girls. Why don't you two go play for a little while longer? Her voice was gentle but firm, and after a brief hesitation, the girls nodded and ran back toward the fountain. Evan barely waited for them to be out of earshot before he spoke. An old friend? His voice was low, controlled, but he knew she could hear the sharp edge of emotion beneath it. Selina pressed her lips together, looking away. What was I supposed to say, Evan? He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. How about the truth? How about telling them who I actually am? She flinched. Just for a second, but he saw it. Evan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Are they mine? Selina closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. She didn't look away this time. Yes. The single word hit him harder than he had expected. He had already known, how could he not, when the resemblance was so obvious? But hearing it out loud, having her confirm it, made it real in a way that left him breathless. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. How could you not tell me? Selina exhaled slowly. Evan, not here. Please. He looked over at the girls. Lily was splashing water at Sophie, and they both erupted into giggles. They had no idea that the man standing only a few feet away was their father. Something about that thought made his stomach twist. He turned back to Selina. Then where? She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small piece of paper. She scribbled something onto it and held it out to him. Meet me here in an hour. Evan took the paper without looking at it. His eyes remained locked on hers. You don't get to walk away from this, Selina. His voice was quiet but firm. Not this time. Selina nodded, and for the first time since he had seen her, she looked as broken as he felt. I know. Without another word, she turned and walked back to the girls, taking each of their hands in hers. She led them away, their blonde hair shining in the evening light, their laughter still lingering in the air. Evan watched them go, gripping the piece of paper so tightly that it crumpled in his palm. 6 years. 6 years of missing out on their lives. And now, he was going to find out why. Evan arrived at the address Selina had given him exactly an hour later. It was a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street, far from the towering skyscrapers and high-end restaurants he was used to. The place had a warm, inviting atmosphere, the kind that made people feel at home. But Evan wasn't here for comfort. As he stepped inside, his eyes immediately found her. Selina was sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her gaze fixed on the window as if she was lost in thought. For a moment, he hesitated, watching her. She looked different than he remembered. The years had softened her, but they had also left their mark. There was something tired in her expression, something that hadn't been there before. He wondered if she saw the same thing in him. Taking a deep breath, he walked over and slid into the seat across from her. Selina glanced up, her fingers tightening slightly around the cup. "You came," she said quietly. Evan let out a dry chuckle. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She exhaled, looking down at her coffee. "I don't know what I expected." He studied her for a moment, then placed his hands on the table, leaning slightly forward. "Start talking, Selena. No more excuses. No more avoiding. I need to know why." She swallowed hard, then slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. "I was scared." Evan's jaw tightened. "Of what? Of me?" She shook her head. "No. Of what telling you would mean. Of what it would do to you. To us." His fingers curled slightly against the table. "You don't get to decide that for me." "I know," she whispered. "I know that now." Silence stretched between them, heavy and filled with all the things that had been left unsaid for 6 years. Finally, Selena let out a slow breath and straightened her shoulders. "I found out I was pregnant after we broke up," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I thought about telling you. I really did. But at the time, you were," she hesitated, searching for the right words. Evan already knew what she wanted to say. Consumed. Ruthless. Obsessed with his career. She didn't have to say it. He had been all of those things back then, and he had lost her because of it. "I thought if I told you, you'd feel obligated," she continued. "That you'd push yourself into being a father when you weren't ready. And I didn't want that for them." Evan clenched his jaw. "You didn't even give me the chance to try." Selena's face softened, and for the first time, there was real regret in her eyes. "I know," she admitted. "And I'll never be able to take that back." Evan sat back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. He had spent years thinking she had walked away because she didn't love him enough to stay. He had never considered that she had left because she was trying to protect something. But it didn't make it hurt any less. His eyes met hers again. "So what now?" Selena hesitated, then glanced toward the window. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know one thing. They deserve to know who you are." Something inside him shifted at those words. For 6 years, he had been living in a world where family wasn't something he thought about, where his past was something he had buried. But now, he had 2 daughters. And no matter what had happened before, he wasn't going to let them grow up without knowing him. "I want to meet them," he said firmly. Selena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't an instant solution. But it was a start. The next day, Evan stood outside a modest suburban house, staring at the front door. His heart pounded harder than it had in any boardroom, any negotiation, any high-stakes deal. He had faced ruthless competitors, made split-second decisions worth millions, and built an empire from the ground up. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Selena had given him the address and a time to come by, and now that he was here, he wasn't sure how to move his feet forward. It wasn't fear of rejection that held him back, it was the weight of what this moment meant. He was about to meet his daughters. Daughters he should have known from the moment they were born. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. A few seconds passed before the door opened, and there they were. Lily and Sophie stood side by side, their identical blue eyes wide with curiosity. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Their golden blonde hair framed their delicate features, their small hands gripping the edge of the doorway as they peered up at him. Selena appeared behind them, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Girls, this is Evan." They didn't react right away. Lily tilted her head slightly, studying him with a seriousness that seemed far too mature for a 5-year-old. Sophie shifted her weight, glancing between him and her mother. Evan cleared his throat, suddenly feeling uncertain about what to say. He had never been one to struggle with words, but now, standing before these 2 small strangers who were somehow his, he felt lost. "Hi," he finally said, his voice softer than he expected. Sophie was the first to respond. "Hi." Lily was still watching him, her little brows furrowed. "Mom said you knew her before." Selina gave her a gentle look. "That's right, sweetheart." Lily looked at Evan again. "Then why haven't we seen you before?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure of how to explain something so complicated to a child. Selina knelt down beside them, placing a comforting hand on Lily's back. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," she said softly. "And sometimes, they don't know the right thing to do until later." Lily seemed to consider that for a moment before glancing at Sophie. "Do you think he's nice?" Sophie shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe." Evan almost laughed, but he held it back. He wasn't expecting them to accept him right away. They didn't know him, and he had no right to expect them to. But he was here now, and he was going to prove that he wasn't going anywhere. Selina straightened, giving him a small nod. "Why don't we go inside?" Evan followed them into the house. It was warm, cozy, filled with little signs of a life he had missed, children's drawings pinned to the fridge, tiny shoes lined up by the door, stuffed animals on the couch. It wasn't the cold luxury of his penthouse. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like home. Selina led them to the living room, where a few toys were scattered on the floor. The girls climbed onto the couch, sitting close together as they watched him with cautious interest. He took a seat in the armchair across from them, feeling like he was being evaluated. Sophie pointed at his wrist. "What's that?" Evan glanced down at his watch. "It's a watch." Sophie frowned. "It's very shiny." Lily nudged her. "Maybe he's rich." Selina let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Girls, we talked about this." Evan smiled slightly. "It's okay. And yes, I guess you could say that." Sophie's eyes widened. "Do you have a big house?" "I do." Lily crossed her arms. "Bigger than this one?" "Yes." She seemed unimpressed. "Do you have a dog?" Evan hesitated. "No." Lily turned to Sophie. "Then I don't think it's that great." Selina covered her mouth to stifle a laugh, and Evan couldn't help but smile. He had no idea what he was doing, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And that was a start. Evan sat in the armchair, watching as Lily and Sophie continued to eye him with cautious curiosity. He had expected some kind of emotional moment, perhaps excitement, or even immediate rejection. But instead, they were simply observing him, trying to figure out who he was and where he fit into their world. And he couldn't blame them. For 5 years, he had been nothing more than a stranger. They had grown up without him, built a life without knowing he existed. Now, in the span of a single day, he had gone from a nameless face to something more. Something they didn't quite understand yet. Selina sat on the couch beside the girls, her presence a quiet reassurance for them. She didn't push, didn't try to force a connection, and for that, he was grateful. Sophie was the first to break the silence. "If you're my dad, does that mean you have to be here all the time now?" Evan glanced at Selina before answering. "I'd like to be here as much as you want me to be." Lily narrowed her eyes slightly, as if trying to catch him in a lie. "But you weren't here before." Evan took a slow breath. "No, I wasn't. And I wish I had been." Lily tilted her head. "Why weren't you?" Selina shifted slightly, ready to step in, but Evan raised a hand. He needed to answer this himself. "Because I didn't know," he admitted. "Your mom didn't tell me." Sophie frowned. "Why not?" Selina cleared her throat. "Because I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do at the time." Lily turned back to Evan. And now? Evan met her gaze, steady and certain. Now, I want to be here. I want to know you both. And I want you to know me. The room was silent for a moment as the girls processed his words. Sophie swung her legs over the edge of the couch, studying him. Do you like ice cream? Evan blinked at the sudden change in topic. Yeah, I do. Sophie nodded as if this were a crucial detail. What kind? Vanilla. Lily made a face. That's boring. Evan chuckled. What do you like? Chocolate chip cookie dough, Lily declared. Strawberry, Sophie added. Evan nodded seriously. Those are good choices. Sophie seemed satisfied with that answer and leaned toward Lily. He's not that bad. Lily sighed, crossing her arms. I guess. Evan looked at Selena, and she gave him a small, knowing smile. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Would you girls want to go out for ice cream sometime? He asked. Sophie's eyes lit up immediately, but she turned to Lily, waiting for her reaction. Lily hesitated, her fingers tapping against the fabric of the couch. Finally, she shrugged. Maybe. Evan smiled. I'll take that as a yes. For the first time, the tension in the room seemed to lift just a little. The girls weren't ready to call him Dad or trust him completely, but they were giving him a chance. And right now, that was more than enough. A few days later, Evan found himself standing outside a small ice cream shop, waiting as Selena helped the girls decide on their flavors. It was a cozy little place, far from the high-end restaurants and exclusive venues he was used to, but there was something about the simplicity of it that felt right. Lily and Sophie stood in front of the glass display case, their small faces pressed close as they examined the rows of colorful ice cream. Sophie was bouncing slightly on her toes, clearly excited, while Lily took her time, carefully considering her options. Selena turned to Evan with an amused expression. They take their ice cream decisions very seriously. Evan smirked. I can see that. After what felt like an eternity, Sophie finally made her decision. Strawberry with sprinkles. The teenage employee behind the counter smiled and scooped her order into a cone before handing it to her. Sophie took it carefully, beaming. Lily, still deep in thought, finally nodded. Chocolate chip cookie dough. Evan wasn't surprised. She had been very clear about her favorite flavor the last time they spoke. Once everyone had their ice cream, they found a small table outside, shaded by a large umbrella. The girls climbed into their seats, swinging their legs as they enjoyed their treats. Evan took a small bite of his vanilla cone and caught Sophie watching him with a thoughtful expression. Do you always wear suits? She asked, tilting her head. Evan glanced down at his neatly pressed navy blue suit and smiled. Pretty much. Even when you eat ice cream? She asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Even then. Lily scrunched her nose. That's weird. Selena chuckled, shaking her head. I told you he was fancy. Sophie took another bite of her ice cream, then pointed at Evan's wrist. You still have that shiny watch. It's called a Rolex, Lily corrected her. Evan raised an eyebrow. You know what a Rolex is? Lily shrugged. I watch shows. Sophie giggled, clearly entertained by her sister's confidence. Evan leaned forward slightly. So, what else do you two like to do besides eating ice cream? Sophie perked up immediately. I like to draw. And dance. And I want to be a ballerina when I grow up. That's impressive, Evan said genuinely. Do you take lessons? She nodded enthusiastically. Mom takes me every Saturday. Evan made a mental note of that. Lily, on the other hand, was more reserved. She licked her ice cream slowly, staring at her cone as if it held all the answers in the world. What about you, Lily? Evan prompted gently. She hesitated, then shrugged. I like books. Selina smiled. She loves stories. She's always reading something new. Evan's interest piqued. What's your favorite book? Lily finally looked up at him. I like adventure stories. Evan nodded, taking that in. I'll have to find a good one for you sometime. Lily studied him for a moment, then slowly nodded. Sophie, meanwhile, had already moved on to another topic. Mom said you have a big house, she said between bites. Like, a really big house. Evan chuckled. I do. Does it have a pool? Yes. Her eyes widened. Can we see it? Selina gave her a look. Sophie. Sophie pouted. What? I just want to know. Evan smiled slightly. Maybe one day. That seemed to satisfy her, and she went back to her ice cream. As Evan sat there, watching the two little girls, his daughters, he realized just how much he had missed. Every small moment, every simple joy, every little question they asked. But he was here now. And he was going to make sure he never missed another moment again. Evan had always been a man of control. In business, in life, in every decision he made, he ensured that nothing was left to chance. But nothing about this situation was within his control. It had been weeks since he met Lily and Sophie, and slowly, little by little, they were letting him in. Sophie was the more open of the two, always asking questions, always eager to learn more about him. Lily, however, was still hesitant. She was observant, careful, and seemed to be waiting for him to prove himself in a way she hadn't voiced yet. He didn't blame her. She had spent 5 years without him. She had no reason to believe that he would stay. That was why, when Selina invited him over for dinner one evening, he didn't hesitate. He wanted to be there. He wanted to be a part of their world, not just a visitor passing through. When he arrived, the smell of something warm and familiar greeted him at the door. He had never been in Selina's home before, but it felt like her. Cozy, inviting, filled with small details that told a story about who she had become over the years. The girls were in the living room, sitting on the floor with a pile of books spread out in front of them. Sophie looked up first and grinned. You're here. Evan smiled. I said I would be. Lily glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to her book. Selina walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Dinner's almost ready, she said, offering him a small smile. I hope you like homemade lasagna. Evan chuckled. I'll eat anything that's not from a business dinner. Sophie hopped up and grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the couch. You have to see this book. It has dragons and princesses and everything. Evan let her drag him to the floor, where she plopped down and flipped through the pages eagerly. Lily, however, kept her distance, her book still open on her lap. What are you reading? Evan asked, turning toward her. She hesitated before holding up the cover. It was a classic adventure novel, something he himself had read as a child. That's a great one, he said. I used to love that book. Lily glanced up at him. You read it? He nodded. More than once. The best part is toward the end. She narrowed her eyes slightly. No spoilers. Evan raised his hands in surrender. Wouldn't dream of it. For the first time, a small smile flickered on her lips before she looked back down at the pages. Selina called them to the table a few minutes later, and to Evan's surprise, the evening felt almost normal. They talked. They laughed. Sophie chattered about her ballet class. Lily shared a random fact about the book she was reading. Selina rolled her eyes when Evan teased her about her cooking skills, but there was warmth behind it. And then, after dinner, as Evan was helping clear the table, Lily suddenly spoke. Are you going to stay? The question caught him off guard. He turned to find her standing near the doorway, her small fingers twisting in the hem of her dress. Stay tonight? He asked carefully. She shook her head. No. Stay forever. Evan's throat tightened. He looked at Selena, who was watching quietly, not stepping in this time. This was between him and Lily. He crouched down so they were at eye level. I want to, he said honestly. More than anything. Lily studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his. People leave, she finally said. His chest ached at those words. I won't, he promised. She hesitated, then slowly stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. It wasn't tight. It wasn't desperate. But it was something. Evan closed his eyes for a brief second, letting himself take in the weight of the moment. He had spent his life building walls, making sure no one could hurt him. But right now, with his daughter's arms around him, he realized something. He wasn't afraid of being vulnerable anymore. Because for the first time in years, he had something worth holding on to. Evan had always thought success was measured by numbers, the size of his company, the wealth he accumulated, the power he held in every boardroom. But as he stood in the middle of Selena's living room, watching his daughters argue over what movie to watch, he realized that this was what mattered. It had been a month since that dinner, and everything had changed. Slowly, carefully, he had become a part of their world, not just a visitor but someone they expected to be there. He had rearranged his schedule, cut back on the late-night meetings, and spent more time here, where he wanted to be. Tonight, he had promised them a movie night. Selena sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, watching as Sophie and Lily engaged in a heated debate. I picked last time, Sophie insisted, her arms crossed. No, you didn't, Lily argued. You picked the week before. It's my turn. Sophie pouted and turned to Evan. Dad, tell her I should pick. Evan froze for a second. She had called him Dad. It wasn't the first time, but every time it happened, it hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. He met Selena's gaze, and she smiled softly before turning back to the girls. Well, he said, clearing his throat. What if we do both movies? One tonight, one tomorrow. Lily narrowed her eyes. What if you fall asleep? I don't fall asleep during movies. Selena snorted. That is a lie. Sophie giggled, and Lily smirked. Okay, but if you fall asleep, we pick the movie tomorrow. Deal, Evan said, holding out his hand. Lily shook it, satisfied. A few minutes later, they were all settled on the couch. Sophie curled up beside Selena, and Lily sat next to Evan, her legs tucked under a blanket. It was casual, easy, something he never would have imagined himself doing a year ago. Halfway through the movie, Lily's head slowly tilted onto his shoulder. He didn't move, barely even breathed, afraid that if he did, she would pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she sighed softly, like she had been holding in something for a long time. Evan glanced at Selena, who was watching with a quiet smile. She mouthed, "You're doing good." For the first time in his life, Evan believed that. It wasn't perfect. There were still things to figure out. But he had his daughters, and they had him. And he wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. The ending of this story is deeply emotional and fulfilling, not because everything is magically perfect, but because it feels earned. Evan begins as a man who believes he has lost everything that ever mattered, convincing himself that success is enough. But when he discovers the truth, that he has two daughters he never knew about, his entire world shifts. What makes this ending so powerful is that it doesn't rely on grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations. Instead, it focuses on small moments, Lily resting her head on his shoulder, Sophie calling him Dad for the first time, Selena giving him a look that says she finally trusts him. These quiet, intimate moments show real growth, real change. Evan doesn't get back the 6 years he lost, and he knows he never will. But he chooses to be present now, to stay, to prove to his daughters that he is someone they can rely on. The fact that Lily, the more cautious and guarded of the two, finally lets her guard down in the end is the clearest sign that he has truly become part of their lives. There's also an unspoken hope in his relationship with Selena. The story doesn't force a perfect romantic resolution, but it leaves room for something more. It suggests that healing is happening, that trust is being rebuilt, not just between Evan and his daughters, but between him and Selena as well. This isn't just a story about a man finding out he's a father. It's a story about earning the right to be one. About learning that love isn't about obligation, it's about showing up, every day, no matter what. And that's what makes this ending so satisfying. It's not just happy, it's deserved.